Hello, everybody. Welcome back to this week's episode of the Refold Roundtable Podcast, the podcast where we talk about all things language learning. My name is Bree, aka Briz, and I am the social media person for Refold, and I am learning Spanish, and I am stage 3A. I am here with the crew, Gorg and Shiki. Gorg, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hello, I am George or Gorg. I'm the community manager for Refold, and I like languages.
And Shiki.
Yeah, I'm Shiki, Japanese learner, admin on the Japanese server, stage 2C, and I'm a language coach for Refold.
Awesome. And today we have a special guest, Atinius. You probably have seen him around the Refold community. He's learning Russian and Chinese. He's known for his reliable advice around the community and his blog where he documents his language journey. Atinius, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Atinius. Like we said, I'm learning Russian and Chinese. Stage 3 Russian, hopefully someday stage 4. We'll see.
Right?
And stage 2B, 2C in Chinese. And I like to think I was invited, not because I give good advice, but because I give the worst advice, the most bad advice. So a
That's
true bad
exactly
advice
why we
expert
invited
on the
you.
panel.
Yeah.
We'll find
Just
out,
for
I guess.
context,
As
I
an
realized I
example
didn't
of
say what the
bad
topic
advice.
is. The topic this week, if you haven't figured it out already, is advice. How can you tell what's good, what's bad, what's helpful, what's not? Is there dangerous advice when it comes to language learning? Well, we're going to jump right into that topic.
I'm ready to get toxic.
I know.
This is one of the things that really annoys me.
I love that. What's something that annoys you, Shiki? Just like I can't even like hear what your thoughts are.
Oh God. Um, so the first thing
Yeah.
I can start with is, I guess I kind of have a policy where it's like, if I don't really know definitively how to answer something in a helpful way, I just won't. Like, if you have questions about the inner workings of Anki and the intervals and percentages and everything to optimize your Anki settings to make it the best thing ever, I am not the one to ask. I don't know. I just go in Anki, I press the buttons, and I get on with my day. I don't mess with it.
Yeah.
But so if somebody has a question about pertaining to Anki or something like that, I'm not going to try to answer that because I am not going to be giving anybody helpful information. Unless it's something like super simple, like, "Oh, hello, I just started Japanese today. Should I do like 50 cards a day?" And then that's where I'll come in with like, "No, please don't do that." And then tell them why. and and that kind of leads me into something else is when people try to give very niche advice. I call it unhinged advice because it only works for a small subset of people. Like, there are certain people who are just built different. Like, they can go in Anki, do 100 cards a day for 2 months, and they come out fine. But that is not something you should be recommending to people just generally.
I like your
it's all
caveat,
over
like they
YouTube.
come out fine. They survive. Like
I mean, you could
survival is
argue
the
the
only
definition.
metrics is the only
The flip
metric of
side of
success.
that would be the people who try it and burn out and then they walk away and then they never come
Exactly.
back
That's
to the language.
dangerous.
Yeah.
So
You have
I
to be
understand.
responsible with your advice. You
Yeah, that's
can't, I
why
think, be
Refold recommends like
unhinged.
10. I know a lot of the
Yeah.
hardcore people out there are going to be listening like 10 a day. That's nothing, but
It's
you have to
sustainable.
understand for like normal average people who like touch grass and like have jobs and like other hobbies, 10 a day ends up being like 70 reviews after a few weeks plus 10
That's a
new
lot.
like 80 cards, and then however
sound
many
like
times they
such a
have to actually
normie.
rep those. Like it's fine. That's like 15-20 minutes, and it's fine.
Yeah. It's a
Yeah,
lot though.
I don't even think it's so much that. Well, okay, some people are truly built different, I guess. But like just people have different like interests and preferences and life circumstances. So just a lot of time like your super niche thing or your content that you want to recommend is just not what the other person needs. And
Yeah.
one of the things that really frustrates me is when people give advice, like I don't know, like all the stuff that we're doing is like based on super like a super factual background or something. Like we're really just following like a lot of anecdotes from successful people. Like obviously there's like good second language acquisition research out there, but like it doesn't cover like a lot of the finer details. It doesn't cover like how many Anki reps you should do per day, or like what is the best ratio of intensive to free flow, because those concepts like don't even exist so much in academia yet.
I like how you said yet, because like one day, hopefully, we'll get there.
That's right.
Well,
We're
yeah.
coming.
Watch
You
out.
know, one thing that's tough is that sometimes in language, well, in anything, but especially in language learning, there are some people who they're totally well-meaning. They're very loud and they're wrong and they give bad advice. And I see it all the time in language
Yes.
learning. Sometimes people are very well-meaning and like they're beginners themselves, or they have really strong opinions. And people, these little baby learners, baby SLA people acquiring their first language, they come in and they listen to the loudest person in the room, and that person might be wrong. And I see
Oh,
it a
for
lot, and
real.
it's really hard to like combat, because like they mean well. They're not intentionally giving bad advice,
Yeah.
but they're very opinionated, and sometimes the advice just really doesn't track. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's
Um,
partly why in the Refold servers, at least in Spanish, and I know other languages have it in their communities, there are people who they're not necessarily mods, but they're trusted, they're helpers. And so they have a reputation for being helpful and giving good advice. Because we used to have the problem a long time ago where it was just tons of beginners giving people advice, like you said. And when you're like it makes sense, right? Because when you're a beginner learning a language, you're on fire. You're so excited. You want to spread the gospel of whatever it is that you're doing and quote unquote help other people. But the problem is, it's kind of like the blind leading the blind in the beginning, because as a beginner, you don't have a lot of experience to build on unless you've learned a language as an adult
and
before.
didn't there used to be like a sort of this mantra of like, don't be a zealot, don't proselytize, like get fluent? Like, wasn't that something that
Yeah.
used to come up in the old days, in the before times, where it's like, don't try and convert your friends to immersion learning. Get good and then
Yes.
tell them how you did it.
Yeah,
And I think that's
exactly.
sort of where it stems from, because sometimes like people, you're right, they like this is like their third day learning Japanese or whatever, and they just know this is the path to fluency, and like that doesn't carry that much weight when it's your third day. You know, you need to
Yeah.
actually get there first.
I remember when I first started learning Japanese, the language that got away. I feel like a lot of people have like that language that got away. And for me, it's Japanese. And I was new. I didn't know what was going on. And so I went onto Reddit. I feel like Reddit is where I used to go for advice. And the hive mind told me on Reddit that immersion was crock. This was like 5 years ago. So like I want to say the tides have turned, but back then it was like immersion. Don't listen to those people. They're crazy. You need Genki and you need output cards and you need all this stuff. And I was like, makes sense to me. If
You
the
know
hive mind
what?
says it, the
You
hive
know
mind must
what?
be true. They
All
must
of
be right.
the language mods and like subreddit mods, we're all kind of like buddy buddy, like we look out for each
Yeah.
other. And I think this is still an issue where like the immersion learning zealots come in and they
Yeah.
go to like normie language spaces and they push
Well, I'm a
this stuff,
normie and I went to a normie space.
so I think that that's sort of a response to like how the immersion learning community can be. You know,
Yeah.
like sometimes people just are a little bit overzealous. But I still think that's still a thing. I still think that immersion learning, especially in Japanese Reddit communities,
Yeah.
leaves a bad taste in their mouth.
It
So-
does.
You gotta
It
tell
does.
me, was it the r/learn Japanese subreddit?
You know it. You know it.
We could
Yeah.
have a whole episode on
I'll
the
be honest, though.
nonsense of that subreddit.
I had a wonderful time LARPing as a Japanese learner. It was great. I met
your
a lot of
notebooks?
cool people. I have my favorite notebooks now that I use for Spanish. I joined I joined this like Genki server on Discord where it was
A
a bunch of
Genki
people
server.
who like who haven't gotten through any of like the lessons and we're all giving each other advice. It was the epitome of like the blind leading the blind. It was
So,
awesome.
so at what point did you guys start to be able to tell good advice from bad advice? Like when
Well,
you
I
first
wasn't getting
start, you
anywhere, so I knew it wasn't
so this is sort
working.
of like the illusion of fluency, right? Like if you don't speak,
Yeah.
I don't know, Pandarin. Well, we'll use the Pandaren people from WoW. You don't speak Pandarin, right? And you hear them and you're
Yeah.
like, wow, that guy's really fluent. You could
Yeah.
be, you don't know, right? So like when you first start learning a language and you really don't know, how did you learn to tell good advice from bad advice? Atenius, it looked like you were going to say something.
Yeah, man, it actually took a long time for me to figure all this out. Um, I don't know if like when I very first started, I had like a lot of bad advice coming my way. Like if I told anybody I was learning Russian or something, they would just be like, "Oh, that's nice," and but they just didn't really care. And so no one was trying to offer advice to me. But I still, went through the traditional learner like Duolingo trap just because I don't know. That's like the atmosphere that that we live in. Like that's the language learning space, in like in the like popular minds of the people, I guess. Um, but some bad advice that like I had to undo actually came from Matt, I think, which may be
Oh,
surprising
now
because
this is
he actually gave
good.
me
Ooh, this is
he,
Tell it.
good.
he
Yeah, no,
yeah
spill this.
he gave me a lot of like great advice. Like I
Yeah,
definitely wouldn't be in the immersion learning community unless I had found his videos.
definitely.
And I
Yeah.
don't even know if he like said this directly, but what I took away was like what I heard was by natives for natives, and that's it. And
He said that. No, you're
that's
right.
okay. So that's what I stuck to. Like I was actually listening to Russian with Max, which is a really nice podcast by a native Russian speaker for Russian learners. And it's really comprehensible and it's really interesting. He talks like about all kinds of different stuff, and he has like videos on top of that too on his YouTube. And I like those videos, but after I saw Matt's videos, I was just like, well, it's not for natives, so I'm not going to use it. And it was only after like I don't know 6 months a year that I started accepting like that stuff for learners is okay. Um, and I guess like I saw other people like were using it and having success. And like there's that guy that linguist that learned French like only by watching stuff, and he did this for like 1,100 hours and barely passed a B1 exam. And like I've seen people like in the Refold community like do way better than that with languages with a big overlap with English. So like I knew like from that it's like, well, okay, something there's some way to optimize this. And even that linguist like thought that like using the easiest content first would have been better. So that all kind of changed my mind towards it. And when I started Chinese, now I'm like all about stuff for learners. I use graded
Yeah.
readers. I listen to podcasts for
Yeah, I
learners, all
think
that stuff.
graded readers are big with Krashen and Paul Nation. Those would be two linguists who are big fans of like easy input that slowly gets harder. So,
That's the whole dreaming Spanish thing.
yeah, I was gonna say Russian with Max is sort of like a mix of like for Spanish learners, Español con Juan, where he just kind of like talks in Russian, and
Yeah.
Dreaming Spanish, where he's got some like TPRS, total physical response, or teaching through proficiency through storytelling or whatever, TPR, TPRS. Um, and I'm also a big fan, but yeah, so the I you mentioned that you had some bad advice from Matt, which is by natives for natives. When did you actually like learn to tell bad advice from good advice? Like you mentioned that you got this bad advice, but when did you actually like how have you learned the warning signs for good advice and bad advice?
Um, I think I mean you just kind of have to like listen to a lot of people, and you have to listen to like a lot of successful people, I guess. And um, like I like I said before, I just like saw people in the server like people of like in the Refold or at the time like in my A community, and they would like post their updates about like how they're doing after a few hundred hours of Spanish, a few hundred hours of French, and they seemed like they were doing really well. Um, and people talked about using like beginner resources. Like I remember people like talking about dreaming Spanish, and that's like I don't know, sparked something in my mind. It's like, oh, I used to listen to something like that. I used to have Russian with Max, but I just gave it up. Um, so yeah, just listening to lots of different people, listening to what works for lots of people, and trying to find that middle ground. Because if there's something that's like really weird and out there, like that doesn't actually work for most people, uh, you're not going to hear it like a lot in Refold. Like you might hear one person talking about it, but just yeah, usually there's not like in the general like r/third Japanese
I-
community where it's like bad advice all around. I think Refold is a pretty good place to get your advice.
One thing that you get with advanced learners, particularly in the immersion learning community, where like people who get good and then they stick around tend to be very passionate people, is they have very idiosyncratic advice. This sort of is a callback to what Vanessa said earlier about like super hyper like min-maxing your Anki. Sometimes people who are like really, really good don't remember what it was like 5 years ago when they just started.
Right.
And you sometimes like advanced learners who are trying to like be senpai, right? They're like trying to be like, hey, I can help you, and I've been there. They actually sometimes give bad advice because they've not been a beginner for so long, or they've not been an intermediate for so long, or whatever, that it's difficult. Like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
advice just is not good.
Yeah. I
This
think
is
that's oh, go ahead.
it's something I've noticed with the Japanese community. It's probably, I mean, I don't know, maybe other communities are kind of getting there, but I think that since the Japanese community has such a long history with AJAT and everything like that, there are a lot of people who are really old school and have been it for a long time. And they're like stage 4. They're stage 4 and beyond. They've like transcended the roadmap. They are super good. And they are super good at the language, answering questions about the language and this or that thing. Does this sound natural? Is this grammatically correct? Things like that. They're really good for that. But yeah, like George said, they're really out of touch with what it was like to be a beginner. So they will come in giving advice that is well intentioned, but is unhinged. It is not realistic
Yeah.
for a beginner to be taking. So if we were talking about figuring out ways to separate the good advice from the bad advice, I would say if you have someone who is stage 4 giving you advice, I would say to take it with a grain of salt. Like, take what you think makes sense, and if something sounds insane to you, maybe not follow it.
Yeah. I think a lot of it has to do with, is it something that you can reasonably do and maintain? Because like
Yeah.
what works for one person might not work for another person. What one person finds really easy and enjoyable, someone else might not find it easy and enjoyable. Like Vanessa, me and you. Like
Yeah.
if you didn't know anything about learning Japanese and I don't know, just like pretend like I'm giving you advice. I love
Yeah.
reading. It's like my favorite thing in the world. I'd be like, reading, it's easy. Just like grab some graded readers, get link, and just like work through it or start with some comics or something. To me, that sounds super easy. But to someone who's completely new in a language, that's a lot.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, do they even like reading?
Yeah.
So like there's more than just are they too far along? It's does what make them jive also work for you?
Mhm.
And that's kind of the danger, is that people give a lot of advice that is personal to them, but not necessarily like to the recipient.
Yeah. And it also goes with like the whole intensive versus free flow thing, where
Mhm.
there are people that are on the other side and they love doing intensive. They will sit and do intensive for
Can you
hours.
define that
And
for people who might not know what that is?
oh yeah, sorry. So intensive so with active immersion, there's
Putting you on the spot.
there's the two sides.
It's
So
not called intensive anymore.
That's why I'm like, can we define this? Like, what is it?
Interactive immersion. Gotta use the
It's a
updated
good
lingo,
term.
Vanessa.
oh
It's
my
a good
god.
term.
Okay, I'm a boomer. I'm sorry.
You got to get fluent in Refold. Come on now, immersion.
Interactive immersion, formerly known as intensive immersion, is like when you interact with it, the language, right? Like you dissect it, you do lookups, you look up grammar, you use your pop-up dictionary, things like that.
Yeah. And what was formerly known as free flow is now called extensive, which is, I mean, it's all a spectrum, but it's on the opposite side of that, where you are doing no lookups or barely any lookups, and you're just letting the language wash over you. You're just vibing, you're chilling, and you're just absorbing it through osmosis. And for
So say
me,
we all.
yes, and for me, I am on the chillin' vibin' side. I mainly do extensive. I barely do interactive. And the idea of sitting and doing interactive for like hours straight sounds like a nightmare. So I don't do it.
And then
And
there's
there are a
like
lot of
me who
people
wakes
who will
up
say
and I have
that.
like my notebooks and I'm like this
Yeah.
weird analog weirdo with my pens and my papers and I'm like physically writing down sentences. I'm like, ooh,
I
this is so
want
good.
to hear about this because we actually had an episode about like alternatives to Anki, and we've got Bree out
Yes.
here actually doing the gold list now. And people are like, people are never going to do the gold list. No one uses notebooks. And people were calling me a
I love
boomer.
my notebooks.
And now we've
Well,
got Bree who's actually been doing it for a few weeks now. How long has it been?
I can look at my notebook. Hold on just 1 second.
Oh, she's
Alright.
got a notebook for that.
I have
She's
it
got
right
many
next
notebooks.
to me. I do. I have a whole system. I don't know how far deep this rabbit hole we want to go, but I'm on day 18.
Day 18. So you're about to have your second pass through because you're doing a modified gold
I
list.
have written down around 280 sentences. I've collected
Anyways,
280.
reeling it back in before we get too far down the normie core study influencer rabbit hole.
Analog.
Analog queen. No.
People do not always put themselves in the other person's shoes, whether it comes to
Yeah.
like,
Right.
oh, I'm super good at Japanese, I've spoken it for 10 years, this is totally obvious to me.
Yeah.
Or they're like an intensive junkie where they love looking up every single word and they can do it for
Yeah.
hours on end. I am not. People make fun of me for being the opposite. I sent out an email about this 5-finger rule and like, don't do things that are too hard and don't do too many lookups. And I got thrashed because I don't want to do too many lookups. If I've
You're a
got more
monster.
than like 1 lookup, 2 lookups per 300 words, I'm out. So I'm
Yeah.
on the other end. I'm closer to to Vanessa with like, let's do the extensive immersion. Let's do the free flow. Let's not do too many lookups. But some people like it. Not me, but some people do.
I like both.
There are people that struggle with the ambiguity.
I
So.
struggle with ambiguity. So I have to free flow easy stuff.
Yeah, that's well, yeah, I'm definitely leaning towards like the what is it now? Interactive.
Interactive, yeah.
Crowd, I guess.
It got changed like for the Refold team and for like the future roadmap update that's going to come out. Some of the wording was like the people didn't understand that we kind of learned from having clients and really working with people one-on-one. We had to change some of the vocab because like it was just confusing. Like there are still
Also,
arguments to
interactive
this day.
sounds a lot more fun. Like when you say intensive
Yeah.
to me,
It
that
sounds
has like a
painful.
stigma. It makes me go, don't want to do it.
There's
But if you
baggage.
say that writing in my notebook is interactive, that's a different spin. I am suddenly emotionally open to the idea of doing
The
interactive
spin.
immersion.
It's
Yeah,
about the
interactive
spin.
immersion. Zing.
Yeah, and
Well,
it's
I like to
amazing.
be intensive sometimes. So
Yeah.
yeah.
What kind of intensive immersion or interactive
So
immersion do you like
Atinius
to
has a
do?
really great story. When he
I
like
wanna hear it.
started learning like immersion learning, he got a book. He got like a light novel. And he knew like no words. And like he just
Is this a
ground it
physical
out.
book?
I don't know if it was physical
Oh,
or
no,
if it
no,
was
no.
like
It was an EPUB.
it was an EPUB with
Okay.
a pop-up dictionary,
Okay.
I guess. Probably
Okay,
Golden
good.
Dict.
Love that.
I mean,
which and like he ground it
yeah,
out. He ground several of these out, and eventually he got good at Russian, or at least he got good at understanding Russian.
Atenius, was this the first thing that you did? You're like, I'm gonna learn Russian. Boom, I have a book. Let's do
no.
this.
Okay, I guess I have to give the backstory.
Okay.
So, like my very first contact with Russian was in high school. I have a friend from Kazakhstan. Russian's his native language.
Mhm.
So I wanted to learn Russian, and like he used to like teach me like words like while we just like walk around the neighborhood and stuff. And like when I got to college, I had to pick some kind of elective, so I just went with the language, and I went with the obvious choice for me, which was Russian, because that's what my friend spoke. So I had 2 semesters of Russian from college, keep in mind this is like years ago. I'm an old man, so like after all that, like I even like used like Pimsleur or Duolingo like a little bit. Like
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it added up to that many hours. Up until like the start of the pandemic, and when that was happening, I was super bored and needed something to do. So that's when I started Russian. So I started Russian like when I had nothing to do but stay inside my apartment, and that's when I decided I could go crazy on something like picking up like a book like translated for natives and grind through it. So I did have some vocabulary to start with from my classes years ago. So not starting from zero, but it was super hard. Like my comprehension was definitely like in the pain zone or whatever it's called in that
I feel like
diagram.
that's similar to what I did. I jumped into reading books fairly quickly. I want to say like within a couple of months of starting. And it was very painful, but it was really fun to grind through. But I used Link, which made it palatable.
Yeah, your
Yeah,
I love
interest should be a
Link.
big motivator.
Hmm.
yeah, I just like I watched the anime version and I was like, well, now I want to know what happens after this. And
Yeah.
like I actually tried to read Harry Potter, and I was like, man, Harry Potter's boring. Like I even tried to read a graded reader before I knew what graded readers were. I was like, this I could not imagine something more boring than this. But when
You
it came to
know,
like find out more about a story that I'd
Harry
already
Potter,
seen.
that is a whole thing of like, it's not bad advice. Like I think Harry Potter is very approachable. It's definitely not
Well, you know the
the easiest
story.
book,
Most people.
but people know the
It's hard.
story, and like it's translated in like 90 different languages. So like that becomes sort of one of those meme advices, right? And I
It's
don't necessarily,
basically the Rosetta Stone of the modern age. Is Harry
I don't want to
Potter.
call it bad advice, but like I'm sure that Atenius got that from someone who was like, "Oh, bro, go read Harry Potter." So he did,
That's
and then
true.
he's
That's true.
like,
That's bad
"This is
advice. I didn't think about that.
Oh, this is a good
I think it's bad
question.
advice anyway.
This is a good question. So when people find out that you're learning a language, do you find that people who have never learned a second language in adulthood just feel compelled to give you advice? Because I feel like
Of
Yes.
the
course," because
result,
they
like,
speak a language, right? It's like
yeah,
everybody speaks a language, even if it's just their native
or
language that
they've
they learned
learned
as
something.
babies.
They're like, I'm really good at math. So
It's
this is
really
how I learned
interesting
math.
because
Yeah,
I used to be a quote unquote language educator, right? For 5 years, I taught English
yeah.
full time, 40 to 65 hours a week, depending. Um, and that's all I did. But I do not give the web devs, I do not give Lindsay or Daniel, the people who run the back end, I don't give them advice
Yeah.
on their code. When I go into VS Code and I make changes to the website, I'm like, are you sure I didn't break it?
Yeah, yes.
But when it comes to language, and I think this is a problem with all social sciences, really,
Yeah.
history, linguistics,
Psychology.
psychology, everybody's got a brain, right? So clearly they're entitled to talk about this. And not to totally go off on a tangent, but everybody and their mother and their grandmother have opinions on language. And
Mhm.
sometimes they're just trash. They're just not
Every
good opinions.
time.
Sometimes,
Every
I mean, that's being
time.
kind. I feel like I don't think I've had a single good take from someone who hasn't learned a language in adulthood before.
Whenever I
You know
get
what was the gut
into
punch for me was
What?
what was that story you told me recently about somebody like a former coworker who like knows that you work for an immersion learning
Yes.
company who what was
Yeah.
the first thing they told you when they wanted to learn Spanish?
What
Like,
is this?
oh, I'm not gonna out. They're a good friend of mine, but they're like, "Hey, you're doing language stuff, right? You're learning Spanish? I've been learning Spanish for years." It's like you're using Duolingo. I just started Duolingo, and I think it's too easy for me. I don't know what's going on, but I just gotta level it up. But I'm like, are you kidding me right now? I literally work for a language learning company. I can hook you up with. No, it's you know what? It's fine. I had to stop myself.
Dude,
But
whenever
yeah,
I get into a conversation with somebody and
everyone
it's
thinks
like,
I'm using Duolingo.
yeah,
Yes, but for my dabbling languages, like, come on, get
yeah.
off me.
Whenever I mention that I'm learning a language, I immediately a timer starts in my head to see how long it takes before they mention Duolingo. They're like, "Oh
You
yeah,
got
Right?
you
wow,
got to give it to
Duolingo."
Duolingo. They're like a pop culture thing. Like
Yeah.
people know the bird.
Unfortunately.
They like the
It's
memes.
it's like synonymous, like how Kleenex is a brand, but it's synonymous with like toilet tissue. Duolingo is synonymous with the word language in people's heads. Like, if you
Hey,
learn a
we
language,
were all
you
there.
use
I
Duolingo.
I finished the Duolingo Indonesian tree
Yeah.
like in 2019. Like I think a lot of people come in, you
Yeah.
know, to language learning from Duolingo for better or worse.
Yeah. Yeah. I think,
I
that advice of like doing Duolingo is one that's really bad. Another thing that people tell me to do is this is the obvious one, but like, oh, just like start speaking. It doesn't even matter. Just like start speaking from
Day
day
1.
one. You're gonna get it. Just start speaking. And I'm like, no, I'm good. Thanks for the advice. I really appreciate it.
Now,
But
on
not
the
gonna do
flip
it.
side, I pretty much did that with Spanish, and my Spanish is still broken. I say broken. It's
Mm,
okay. I'm sure I still messed up the subjunctive. Um, but I found it really rewarding. So on the flip side, like
sure.
it's like a pendulum. There's like two extremes. You've got the
Oh,
don't
absolutely.
output until you've done 243,000 hours of input, right? Or you'll
Yeah.
give yourself a bad accent and don't read. And then there's
I
the
got a
flip
bad
side
accent
of like
forever.
go output when you only know 3 words and you don't know any
Yeah, because
grammar.
that's not rewarding at all. Like that's just like to an introvert like me, that is like the kiss of death. Okay, fine, I'll never learn language. I don't want to talk to anybody. Like,
It's
come on now.
demotivating.
But on the same thing for the apps thing, because you have people that are like, oh yeah, Duolingo. Oh yeah, I got this app. On the flip side, I think for people, it could be a wonderful tool if you treat it
I think they can
like a
replace
tool.
I think they can replace beginner content to a degree, or they can aid. Um,
It's like
you
graded
know Mr.
readers almost to an
Salas?
extent. It's
You know Mr.
comprehensible
Salas?
sentences that you're reading. Yeah.
He's the
Yeah,
Refold
he's great.
Spanish partner.
He's
And
awesome.
he's recently really gotten on the Anki bandwagon. But before we totally converted him,
Yeah.
he definitely talked. And if you guys are learning Spanish, go watch Mr. Salas. His videos are super comprehensible because they're like
They're
in the
great.
language domain.
He's
He's
one of
got
the few
very,
people that I have
very
like level
clear.
5, level 6 comprehension of. Like when I watch his
Yes,
stuff, I'm like, I know all of this.
yes. On a 1 to 5 scale, 1 being super easy, 5 being super hard, I rate him 1, and he's like the only one I've done that.
Yeah, right?
Um,
Right?
he's just because it's a domain that we know very well, and like
It's our special interest for sure.
it's like our special, yeah, it's our special interest. Uh, and he's very comprehensible, but his method, at least like back when he wrote his book, from zero to polyglot, was essentially Refold in the sense that it
But
was
do an
like go
app
immerse,
first.
but do an
Yeah.
app. Don't do Anki for
Yeah.
your first couple thousand words.
Which I think
It's
is
fine.
brilliant.
And he doesn't
I think
recommend
it's brilliant.
Duolingo. He recommends other apps that are,
Like Busu,
better.
right?
He recommends Busu. He recommends some sort of
Boring.
like output app for English speakers because a large portion of his
Elsa
audience are
Speak.
Spanish speakers
I'm
learning
down.
English.
Yeah, I know he's really into Elsa Speak but that's like outputting and shadowing and stuff. Um, he doesn't say not to do Duolingo though, as far as I recall. He's like, pick an app
Yeah,
and
I don't
do
think
it.
Duolingo's the fastest, and I'm really
It's
unsure about this
slow.
new revamp they've got. But I think it's fine. Like
I'm into it.
if you
I'm so
finish,
into
you'll
it.
get you'll get 500, 1,000 words maybe somewhere. Like it's like a 1K deck. It's going to take you a lot longer than 3 months,
Yeah. I think
but it's
a good one
okay.
to speed run is Lingo Deer. Because I speed ran Lingo Deer when I
So the
first did
difference between
Spanish.
Lingodeer and Duolingo is Lingodeer is going to be paid past the first couple of lessons. That's why it's
Oh
not
yeah,
like
I
this
bought a
household
lifetime
name.
access to it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Duo's free.
But
But like think
but I
about
mean, if
people like
people are out here
think
buying
about
books
people
and
like your
language classes
sister,
and stuff,
right? What happened when
my
you gave your
God.
sister Anki? She hated it, right? She's like, what the hell? I don't want to set up
Yeah,
Anki. She
and
was
she's smart. She's a smart like
she's
person
a
who
very
doesn't
smart
obsess.
person.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, she actually
So
works with
I tried.
language, but will not
She
dox your
does.
sister.
That's fine. She's a speech pathologist. Ooh.
She's a speech pathologist. Like she actually works with language, right? And
Yeah, she
she's like,
does.
I'm gonna learn Spanish, and like Brie was like, here's this Anki deck. Like I work for a language company, let's go. And she's like, this is awful. Like people just don't like Anki. So like,
Yeah.
it's I'm not saying like Duolingo's bad, don't do Duolingo. I actually think it's okay advice. Like do Duolingo, treat it sort of like a game, sort of like a priming activity for a little bit of vocab. Understand that
It's
it's going to be
great for
slow.
priming. Yes.
Understand that it's going to be slow.
All of
I don't
those
know.
caveats, though, like normies don't get it. Like
No,
when
exactly.
when
That's the
someone comes up
problem.
to you and is like, "Here, oh, you're learning a language? Here, just use Duolingo." And then the person that's getting told
Yes,
that will just
just
run with
use
it and be like,
Duolingo.
"Just use Duolingo, nothing
Got it.
else." And then
Forever.
they expect
Diamond League.
something out
Here
of
I
it.
come. Yeah. I think
they
it's
don't know all
wonderful
the
though.
background.
I think like George said, like Duolingo is great for getting like a basic sense of basic sentence structure. So like the connecting words, like a, the, and, or things like that. I think it's excellent for teaching things like that, which as soon as you can jump into something like this is me giving unsolicited advice, jump into like a graded reader or an easy show or flood yourself with immersion. But I think for me personally, like doing apps like Lingodare and Duolingo made jumping into immersion more enjoyable because it, like you said, it primed me. And I think that's like what Mr. Salas said was get to a point
Mhm.
where your immersion can be somewhat comprehensible so you can get a lot from it.
I think
But
the only way that someone like the ideal way to recommend
I'm gonna
Duolingo,
get canceled for
it,
somewhat liking Duolingo.
I mean, it would have to be presented like a prescription medication commercial
It
in
is,
the
yes.
US. It's like use Duolingo except, and then you have all this fine print
Yeah.
where someone's reading it really fast of all the side effects, and it's like,
Yeah.
wait a minute, it's not just use Duolingo. Like there's so many caveats.
There are. There's so many side effects. Yeah, for sure.
Man, I could comment on this, and I'm not going to. Like,
I know. It's so
like
hard not to.
it's like you can use Duolingo, but use it in combination with therapy, sort of like the antidepressant things. Don't just use.
So I actually have Duolingo trauma. Like
Oh
Don't
no.
we all?
I tried to like bum rush it a couple of times, the Russian tree, and I
Yeah.
was just like, man, why is Russian so hard? Why isn't this connecting? And I don't actually think it's that fun. Like I know that people like it for the gamification elements, and I even like tried to use it to like learn languages in like
Yeah.
college and high school, whatever. But I don't know. I just can't recommend it to anybody like at all. Like I really don't like it. Like
Man,
I don't
one of
want to
these
go
days-
slower. I want to go fast. I want to be
I
I
understand
wanna be
that.
floating out. So
One of these
Yes.
days, I'm gonna write a blog on using Duolingo in your target language to learn another language, even if it's just dabbling. Because
How to
like people
use
don't
Duolingo
realize
the right way?
people
How to
don't
trigger
realize
the
like you can
entire
learn
Refold
Cantonese from Mandarin on Duolingo, or you can learn Guarani from Spanish on Duolingo, and you can't learn these languages from English. So like that's a way to like sort of like I don't know like slide in there and like hijack Duolingo and make it immersion. It's not an immersion for the new target language, but it's still like immersion, right? And I would
Yeah.
love to write a blog post on that, but I'm gonna reel it back in here.
Yes.
And speaking of Duolingo, speaking of I did a little bit of Duolingo. I took some college. People sometimes misattribute things. They don't remember exactly what their journey was, even if they're totally sure. They
Oh
don't
yeah.
know.
I
And
have
you see
no
this all the
idea.
time with like English learners from foreign countries. It's like, oh yeah, I just watched cartoons all day when I was like 16 and I got really good. And they're like, you also had
Class
like
since you were 6.
10 years of English class. Like that's why you were able to
Yes.
go in, and like
Yeah.
people misattribute, right? Like they misattribute why they got good. Like they really don't know. They just know what they think they know.
Yeah.
So be careful because learners sometimes misattribute things even when they don't mean to.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely done it. Like, I would not recommend to a new Russian learner to just like pop open their favorite light novel, translate it into Russian, and start reading it. I think you'll have a very bad time if you don't know a few hundred words already.
Yes.
Go check out Russian with Max. Go download the Anki deck our server put together, and then maybe a little bit later try some light novels.
So speaking of bad advice, natives
Okay.
sometimes give bad advice. So
All the
we've got this sort
time.
of experiment going on where a couple of the Refold team members are like finally starting to output. A lot of people behind the scenes, we've got a lot of people who work for Refold. They came in and they've spent the past 2 years inputting, and now they're ready to output. And one common thread is that natives will correct things that aren't really like wrong. Natives correct native mistakes, and natives give bad advice. If you ask
Yes.
a native Filipino, what should I read in Filipino? They're going to tell you to read these stuffy 1800 books they can barely read because the vocab has changed so much. Because that's what they read in school. That's what they know, right? They're not going to recommend the fun little trashy romance books that are really easy, really like fast food of books, sort of like just get in there, guilty pleasure, easy reads that are fun. They're going to recommend, or they're going to recommend a modern classic like, oh, read this book here, the 70th decade, where it talks about all the oppression that women went through under like, the old dictatorship and like really hardcore stuff. So I have to
Yeah.
say, natives, even well-meaning natives who are actually excited, because believe it or not, a lot of natives don't care that you're learning their language.
This
It,
literally happened to me like the other day.
what happened? They were
My
like, go read this book, and it's something like
my
super
my
intense.
my stepmother, who is
Brazilian,
from Brazil, and I'm like
speaks
dabbling in
Portuguese.
Portuguese. I like how you outed me the other week for learning German. Well, that's gone. That dream's dead. I am learning
Dream's dead.
Portuguese right now. But anyway, it's like just dabbling. And so I told her, I'm like, yeah, I'm dabbling in Portuguese. She's like, oh, you should read this book. I read it when I was a little girl. It was like something about a boat. I don't know. And then like the next day she texts me and she goes, don't read that book. It's written in archaic Portuguese. I barely understand it. And I'm like, what? I was about to go out and like find this book because you said you read it as a kid. And it's like apparently this really weird book. She's like, yeah, just like read it in Spanish. It's like too hard. I'm like, okay. At least she like the next day was like, oh, just kidding, Brianna. Don't do it. But that's pretty funny. Her first instinct was to give me this really hard book to read.
Yeah.
Well,
the
if you think about it,
nostalgia,
like
I guess.
the Spanish and Portuguese are still intelligible-ish to people. It would be like recommending Shakespeare, right? Like if you ask a Spanish speaker, what should I read? They're like, oh, read Don Quixote. And you're like, that
No,
book
thank
is
you.
500 years old. It's just gonna be not intelligible, you know?
Read Portrait of an
Obviously
Artist
not
as a
that
Young
extreme.
Man.
But natives
Yeah.
often will like, who haven't learned the language, sometimes give bad advice. Either it's overly prescriptive, what they think you should say or do, versus
Mhm.
how people actually use the language. Or it just is like their references, like, oh, I read, it's sort of like your high school reading list, right? If you're not really a reader, that might have been the last time you read a book. And natives are that way too. And they'll give you this recommendation of like, go read this book, and then it's boring like school assignment tier reading.
Yeah. The thing I've noticed when it comes to natives giving bad advice, you mentioned earlier about how natives will correct things or try to overcorrect things, things that are not really wrong per se. Like when somebody says, "Oh, I'm learning French and I'm a native English speaker. Can you please correct my French?" You are identifying yourself as someone who is not a native English speaker. So they could say something that a native French speaker would say, but you have an inclination to correct them because you know they're not a native speaker. And I've noticed this on the English server. because I recently, well, not recently, a few months ago, but I joined the English server as an English native to see if I could lend a hand. And I've noticed that there's a lot of corrections that go on in there where I'm just like, I mean, it kind of sounded like something a native English speaker would say. I mean, it's probably grammatically wrong, but it's not unnatural per se. And especially with internet language, it's like
It's like,
there's no
people are
rules.
like,
It
English is
doesn't
not a
matter.
pro-drop language. You have to always use the pronoun. If I look at my messages on Discord, it's like, hey, go into the store, be back later.
Mhm.
You can be pro-drop over text.
I
Uh,
am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and
It's
I
a
could
problem.
rant about the English server and why I think it should be part of Refold Central so that they're not in their little English as a second language ghetto surrounded by other non-natives. But
that's a blind leading the blind
for
situation.
whatever reason, for whatever reason, people are really attached to the server. So it's there, but I would also like to have the non-natives interacting with more natives rather than like other advanced learners for that reason sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like as an English speaker, whenever I'm talking to someone who's learning English, I all of a sudden forget how English is supposed to sound.
Yes.
It's really hard to
Yes,
analyze
yeah.
English as an English speaker.
I
I
can't
can't
tell
even
you
like think
what's
of the
grammatically
sounds
right,
that we
but
say. Like, how do I say milk? 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 Like, I have no idea. What is a milk? Like,
You say
what is
milk,
it?
you say it wrong.
I do say it wrong. I know.
Oh,
You say it
No.
differently.
the
That's
one
some
who says pin
prescriptivist.
for pen.
Yeah.
I am only prescriptivist when I'm right. You say milk.
Milk.
Ben says both with an
Yes.
L, and that drives me crazy. Ethan pronounces the T in often, which also drives me crazy. It's okay though. We're not gonna go down there. But when it comes to like
Save it for the after party.
when it comes to advice,
Yeah.
sometimes it's unsolicited, and it might not even be bad advice, although it can be. That can be really annoying when people are like, sometimes people make these mistakes, right? And then like people give overly aggressive feedback, or they give feedback
Oh,
that you're like,
God.
that's cool. I didn't really ask. Like you totally
Yeah.
interrupted the conversation, or like, you know what I mean?
My hot take is that unsolicited advice is generally bad advice.
I can agree with
Even when
that.
it's good, it's bad.
Even
Yeah.
when
By
it's
the
good,
sheer
it's
fact
bad
that no one
because
asked.
someone has to be like, you have to be in the right mindset to accept advice. So, like, if my friend comes to me and is like, I'm learning a language, I'm not like, oh, you need to do this. This is the right way. Don't drop your Duolingo. You're wasting. I would never do that because, like, it's their language learning path or journey or whatever la di da that they're doing. And it's not up to me to police what other people do. You know what I mean? However, what I will say is, oh, that's awesome. I'm really interested in learning languages. If you ever want to chat about it one day, like, would love to, I have a lot of resources. So if you want them, just hit me up and I got you. Like that's generally where I go. And then if they hit me up, I will genuinely go, this is what I think you'd like. Take it or leave it. I don't really care.
That's
When you
too wholesome for
emotionally,
this podcast.
no, but people like get emotionally attached to their advice and they take it as like a personal rejection if people don't follow
Yeah.
it. And it's like, people are going to do what they're going
Yeah.
to want to do. Some people got to learn the hard
I
way.
I mean, I'm one of those people that's like, language learning is like, I don't know, like 4 or 5 hours of my day, like on average. So I'm always super excited to talk about it, and I always have to restrain myself. I what comes out of my mouth is more or less like what Briz said, and like that's exciting. Let me know if you want any help, because it is. And if they do ask me, like I very eagerly give like all the advice I can. But it's like I don't think people are gonna listen to me like if I just start talking about it really. So like that's a good enough reason for me not to try. And like I even do that in Refold sometimes where I see somebody say something like I slightly disagree with, like I have a slightly different attitude or approach
That's
towards
any niche
language
hobby
learning.
though, right? Or not even
Yeah.
niche hobby. That's any hobby where like there's a level that's acceptable to casual people in terms of giving advice, and then there's a level that's acceptable to enthusiastic people and to enthusiasts. Where like I know that sometimes my friends talk to me about their interests, and I've got no real like grounding, and my eyes glaze over, even if I genuinely care because I like them as a person.
Yeah.
So I get it, you know.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
like I like to
Don't
collect
info
decorative
dump.
plates. And I'm like, oh, okay. It's cool.
I thought for a second you were saying that you did, and I was like, this is a whole side of you that I had no idea existed.
You know.
No, it was just an example of like a niche interest.
Speaking
Cheeky,
of
refill coach, plate collector.
speaking of
Connoisseur.
advice within the community, do you guys
Yeah.
know the term bro science?
No, but tell me all about it.
Oh,
I
so
wanna
like bro
hear it.
science is
me.
like lifting, like just lift, bruh. And they're
Not
like,
just lift, bro.
there's like some really weird stuff, like that things that other lifters believe that may or may not be true.
Okay.
And I don't know, Tinius, do you know bro science? Can you explain it better than I can? I'm at a
It's
loss
just
for words.
it's just like beliefs that are common in whatever your niche hobby community is that like don't really have solid like scientific backing, but are somehow stuck around like a long time. Like there's a lot of stuff like in lifting and in like nutrition too. And so like a lot of health stuff, I guess.
Let me see here. Bro science. Let me Google a definition. Bro science is a term for misinformation circulated among men, usually bodybuilding claims not backed by science. Bro science. It's like, I don't know, it's like people arguing that like certain types of meat are more bioavailable without actually knowing what bioavailability is and like stuff like that. And that happens in the immersion learning community too. People give bro science. One of the bros bro science advice is bad. People will tell you, no, you're like, don't review it because you're messing up the learning curve. But like, really? Because like if you see the word outside of Anki in your immersion, doesn't that also mess up like weird beliefs about Anki that are kind of idiosyncratic? Or like weird beliefs about outputting that are idiosyncratic. That's all bro science, right? Like the whole like silence period stuff.
Wasn't that a
That's a big
crashing thing though?
example. I don't know.
The silent period? I mean, he probably talked about it in some paper. Like, I don't know. I don't know the context. Maybe
Let's
it
see
was
here.
like, hey, just don't talk for a while and it'll be fine. I think it kind of boiled down to that.
So, silent period, as defined by Krashen, is a period where they are unwilling or unable to communicate. It,
That makes it
it that
sound like it's not a
it,
choice. It's just something that happens.
it doesn't sound like it's this period of not of like you have to listen, otherwise you'll do
Hmm.
bad. Which is sort of where the bro science comes in. Like
Yeah.
if you say konnichiwa one time, if
Mm-hmm.
you've not immersed for 2,000 hours, you've ruined your accent, kind of thing.
Yes. It's over.
So yeah, like you gotta avoid the bro science, and it's hard to spot. It's hard to spot until you've been part of the community.
Yeah. You know, I think you also like part of like bad advice is how much I think earlier we talked about taking things with a grain of salt. Like for some people, accent is a huge deal to them. And so maintaining, I don't want to say like purity, but you know, doing everything in their power makes sense to them to, you know, have the
Oh, now
perfect
this is
accent because
gonna
that's what they
open up a
want.
can of worms, because like, Atinius, haven't you read the actual literature on like fossilization and stuff?
Yes, you linked it. I read it.
Okay, because you're
And
one of the few people who reads the papers that I link.
Wow.
yeah,
And what was your
Way
take
to
from that?
go.
Your take was something like, there's not been enough research done, because historically, like, you only see a slice, right? Like somebody like they output 10 years ago, and then there's never a follow up, so you don't get to see the
yeah,
improvement. But what's
something
your
like
take
that. I
from that?
mean, it was 3 papers, and I read them like it was probably at least a year ago.
It was like a
Um,
year ago.
yeah, the take that I think you gave was like fossilization is not real. And the take that I took away was that no one agrees on what the term fossilization means.
And there's not
And
enough
also
data
it's really
because
hard
there's
to,
not enough follow up
yeah,
studies.
yeah. So
Sure.
like I don't think like the idea that like fossilization as like making bad habits that are bad to break, like that's a pretty reasonable thing. But like the idea that you can never fix something ever, like I think that's also like obviously not true. So
That's definitely a
Right.
lot to
My
claim.
initial takeaway was just saying fossilization's not real. But Attinius kind of converted me, and he was like, actually, it's more like there's not enough data. And I would agree, and that's where bro science comes
Yeah.
in. Sometimes there just isn't enough data.
But that's
You
what I'm
know,
trying to
like
say, though, is like I can understand having an abundance of caution if that is something that's important to you. But trying to impose that abundance or overabundance or unnecessary caution on people where that's not their goal or it's not something they care about, and trying
people
to
are extreme, and sometimes it's weird. It's like
it's weird when like the advice is your goal is wrong. It's weird when the advice is
no, I
what you're
know some
trying to
people get
achieve
a
is
little bit
wrong.
like it's like a pathology. Like some people are like, "Oh yeah, I'm
That's
learning
the
Mexican
thing.
Spanish," and they will never listen to anybody who doesn't speak the variety of Spanish. And then I don't know, that's just really
Yeah.
like extreme to me. That's just really
It is
weird.
extreme. It is. But I mean, if that's important to them, I can understand it. But then going to, someone like me who's like, I just want to be very
But
proficient in the
is it better
language.
for them? Like, I think it's
I
harmful because
don't
then they're not going to be able to
know.
understand people from like the Dominican Republic that's just weird. I don't agree with that
It's
at all. I think that
I
some
could
I'm
language learning
actually
advice
understand it
taken
though.
to the
I could
extreme
understand
can
it.
be dangerous, and it's bro
But
science.
there's always a
Only listen to
perspective.
the dialect that you want to learn ever. That just
Well, that's
that doesn't track to me.
boring. It's boring.
I
It's
mean,
like
I'm sort of doing that like right now with Chinese. Like I
Atenius,
try to
you're
I
so
try to avoid.
controversial.
Well, I mean, okay, I'm not like terrified of hearing people from the South, people from Taiwan speaking
Yeah.
Mandarin. But like Northern Mandarin is like the accent that I'm targeting. So if I can find that, like that's what I'm going for. Like I don't know, I'm not scared of hearing a Taiwanese person speak, like open their mouth once and my accent's gone forever.
It just flies out your
Um,
brain.
but
It just
Not a
the accent
Taiwanese
like
leaves your
person.
body. It's
yeah,
so awful.
and it's like it's not it's not that I don't ever want to understand Taiwanese Mandarin. Like I really
Yeah.
really do, but it's just like I'm hoping that I can understand Northern people faster if I just listen to Northern people.
Right, but you
The
don't have a pathological fear of hearing someone
I
speak
hope not.
non-standard Chinese.
He's gonna go on like a
And you
daytime
know
talk
what,
show.
Attinius? When you do go and start outputting, I promise the first person you actually have a voice conversation with is not going to speak standard Mandarin.
Oh, for
Whoa.
sure.
You
Whoa.
know, that's the
Why you
reality
gotta curse him like
of
that?
Chinese, and that could be a really cool episode. I would love to have Attinius back on to talk about his experience learning Russian, an
Yeah.
incredibly monolithic language, and Mandarin, a language with a lot of internal diversity, because so many of its speakers are kind of non-native. But I'm not going to open up that worm, like that
I
can
have
of
a
worms, not right now.
really fun idea to end this podcast. I think we should all go around and give one piece of advice,
Ooh.
and then the learners can decide. Our listeners can decide if they want to take
If it's
it
all
or not.
conflicting advice, even better. That'll be funny.
Okay, that would be funny if it was. George, you start. Give one piece of advice.
One piece of advice:
Just
listen
one.
to different dialects. Don't shield yourself. You know, it happens. The Portuguese learners, oh, I don't understand people from Portugal. Well, yeah, their dialect is hard, but you've also never listened to it. Just go listen to it. Listen to the different dialects. Don't hold yourself off from like listening to somebody from Scotland if you're learning English, or New Zealand. Like they're English
Right.
speakers too.
That's not the
Like
best example. Stay away from Scotland. That's basically. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. I'm just kidding. It's good. That's good advice. It's good. I think it's good because that's what I'm doing. I'm like listen to whoever I want, whenever I
Mm.
want. All right, Shiki, your turn. What's your advice? It could be unhinged. Like people will have to figure it out for themselves if it's good or bad. That's part of
I
the
mean,
exercise.
it is kind of abstract. My biggest
Ooh.
piece of advice, because I think newbies make up the biggest group. So my advice is normally targeted towards newbies.
Yeah.
My biggest thing for newbies, please breathe and relax. You have only been studying this language for a grand total of 3 minutes, and you're already freaking out. Like, oh my God, I can't read. I can't read the language. Oh my God, I don't understand these words. I learned them on Duolingo, but I don't know what they're saying. Ugh! And you're
Okay.
like freaking out. Please. It's going to take time. Just breathe and relax and come back after like a month and everything will be fine. I promise you.
Maybe 3 months. Like it takes longer than that.
2-3
Tinius.
months, whatever.
Okay, Tinius, what do you got? I'm excited.
I'm gonna give 2 pieces of advice. My
Whoa!
first advice, my first piece is only listen to one dialect. Don't listen to Jorge. Just pick one. And, stick to that.
Yes. The
Yes.
conflicting
forever,
advice.
forever,
Fight,
even after
fight,
you're fluent.
fight.
My second piece, is please don't listen to your target language while you're sleeping or do anything else to disrupt your sleep. Sleep
Oh.
is super important for learning.
100%.
There used to be this, like, I don't know if it was part of AJAT, but it was part of like the immersion learning community, and that some people would listen to Japanese in their sleep. Don't do that. You need to sleep, and
It
you
was
don't want to
AJAT.
Who's
disrupt
that
it.
one
And
guy with like the side profile picture on Twitter? Gary Ben or something.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
He was a big proponent of that, wasn't he?
I haven't seen a post.
can't think of his name,
in a long
but
time. Japanese Gary Ben.
Is it really Gary Ben? I was right.
Yeah,
All I remember is
probably.
Yeah, Japanese
the-
Gary Ben. Yeah.
all I remember is the Twitter picture. Okay, not to derail, but yes, do not do that.
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
get good sleep.
Or do whatever. It's up
Do
to you
not
to
live
decide
next
if you're
to
gonna
a
take that
karaoke
advice.
bar.
That's just for context. George literally lives next to a karaoke bar.
Yeah, I
and
just moved
It's,
and I work overnights, so like
it's
the
not
whole
good for his
night,
sleep.
like 1 p.m. until midnight, my learning has suffered. So I can
You should
I can
change your
verify.
advice to don't live by a karaoke bar. I would say that my advice is to follow your interests and don't compare yourself to other people.
Love it.
Yeah, I feel like that's a twofer, but like don't read and do things that you think other people would think are good. Do what you want to do.
You've got me wanting
And
to
if you
like
follow
change
your
my
interests.
advice because I'm guilty of that. I totally
Yeah.
compare myself all the time. Atinius knows because I'm in his
hard.
inbox all the time, and he
Just
like
doing
studies
stuff for the
5 hours a day, and
games.
I don't. Then I'm like, why
Yeah.
did you get so good at Chinese? I started before you.
How dare you?
How dare you? Because he studies 5 hours a day and I don't. That's why.
Yeah.
So all
Like
of this is
pound
actually
for
sound
pound.
advice. I like all of the advice. So the
Maybe.
moral of the story, listen to us, don't listen to other people.
Yes. We are the only ones who know the truth. Don't listen to anyone
Last
else.
piece of advice. Listen to the Refold Roundtable podcast. That's your
Yes.
true
Of course.
path to fluency.
Yeah.
All right, y'all. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Atenius, thank you. It was a blast talking to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was great. And to everyone tuning in to this week's live episode of the Refold Roundtable podcast, thank you so much for joining us. If you're hanging out for the premiere, make sure to join us for the after party immediately after the podcast. That's going to be in the official Refold Discord. If you love this episode and want to hear more, you can listen to past episodes on YouTube and Spotify and other places where there's podcasts. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to give us a like and leave a comment to let us know. We read all your comments. We would love to hear from you. Tell us some advice. We'd love to read it. If you have a topic for a future episode, we'd also love to hear from you. You can suggest future topics in the Refold Discord, and links to everything that I mentioned in that spiel is listed in the description below. That's it for today, and we will see you next week.
Thanks for tuning into this week's episode of the Refold Podcast. We hope you enjoyed listening and maybe even learned something new. Projects, events, and content like this podcast are only possible thanks to our generous patrons. If you liked this and want to see more similar projects, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Visit community.refold.la/Patreon-benefits to learn more.